Again, I am reading from the Universal One. Similarly, the whirling spears of the steamer's wake, with its big bubbles, its lesser bubbles, and its milky foam, are a line of white against the deep blue sea, but not separate from the sea in substance. The temperature in the wake of the steamer is higher than that of the surrounding water. Similarly, the temperature of the spiral nebula is higher than that of the surrounding ether, matter, because of the heat energy generated by thinking and transferred to the whirling spears. The law governing both bubbles and nebula is the same. The difference between them is only relative in point of time. Both disappear when they cease to whirl, for their appearance of existence is due solely to the heat energy of motion. A bubble may whirl for a few moments and a sun for 100 billion years before their generated heat becomes radiated into their father-mother substance, which gave them birth. The difference in time is but relative, for time is nothing in eternity. When the bubbles have radiated their heat to the temperature of the surrounding water, they cease all appearance of individual existence. Their forms have disappeared with cessation of motion, but their substance is as existent as the ocean is existent. When giant suns have radiated their heat to the absolute zero of the surrounding ether substance of mind, they cease all appearance of individual existence. Their forms have disappeared with the cessation of motion, but their substance is as eternal as mind is eternal. Chapter 4, Thinking Mind. The process of thinking is a simple one. It is a swing of the cosmic pendulum from the stability of mind substance to apparent instability and back again to stability. The registration of this effect in the ocean of universal mind is contained within the form of an elongated sphere, and all its variable and complexities may be read upon two exactly opposite spiral waves within two halves of that sphere. Light, heat, electricity, magnetism, form, crystallization, sound, mass, the elements and compounds of elements, time, space, attraction, gravitation, force, energy, inertia, sex, life, death, sleep, memory, the souls of all things and the complex ideas of all things, in fact, all that man can comprehend of this universe, can be spelled out in their beginnings on these two opposing spiral waves within one sphere, and on through to their endings in 9 other increasingly larger, though flattening spheres, or ellipsoids. These two opposing spiral waves within one sphere represent the entire simple process of thinking, but not the entire variability of the effect of thinking. They represent the beginning or highest octave in the cycle of thinking, of which there are 10. The simple process of thinking is repeated exactly in the 10 octaves, but with periodic variability and complexity of registered effect. All variability and complexity of registered effect is orderly in variation and complication, and thus are all effects comprehensible to that man who has knowledge of the cause of those effects. Everywhere throughout its entirety, the mind substance is a constant agitation, undergoing the orderly process of thinking. The force called thinking, which impels mind, into concentration and decentration in sequence is the only energy of the universe. There is no other energy. The universe is mind only. The universal constant of energy registers in the substance of mind the illusions caused by the thinking of mind. Every microscopic point in divine mind becomes the center of the universe of mind, with its first impulse of the act of thinking. For with this first impulse is form born into a universe which is without form. From that center, the explosive, reactive, genero-radioactive, electromagnetic disturbance, which constitutes the process of thinking, reproduces itself throughout the entirety of the universe at incomprehensible speed in waves of creating light units, which waves return again to that exact center. Thinking is an action followed by a reaction of that action. The action of thinking constitutes a series of events in sequence. The intervals between events in sequence constitute that effect of motion called time. Without a sequence of events, time could not be, for there would be nothing to mark time. Time begins with the action of thinking. It is an effect which appears with motion in opposition and disappears into motion in inertia. The events in sequence which give birth to that appearance called time are the opposing pulsations of generative and radiative light. These opposing pulsations give dimension and form to that which man calls life. To man there is no life without form. Form and dimension are fleeting. Life is eternal. Life is merely the action of thinking, and thinking is as eternal as the thinking substance of mind is eternal. Universal thinking is rhythmic thinking. The entire substance of universal mind is thinking in varying but orderly rhythmic meter. The meter of universal thinking is measurable in its orderliness throughout the entirety of the universal substance. The tempo of the cosmic rhythmic meter of thinking is absolute. All thinking is expressed in measurable and opposing impulses of opposing motion. All motion is action and reaction. Chapter 5. The process of thinking. The action impulse and the reaction impulse of the thinking process are alternating between the apparent opposites known as generation and radiation. Generation and radiations are opposites which constitute the appearance of motion in opposition. Generation is the attractive, gravitative, positive, electric force, and radiation is the repulsive, emanative, negative, magnetic force. All motion, whether in opposition or in inertia, is in equilibrium. That is to say, the amount of energy expended in any two opposite swings of the cosmic pendulum is always quantitatively constant. The apparent variation is in the dimension of the two opposing swings, and is not of the constant of energy. The amount of generative and radiative energies expending in the two opposing oscillations anywhere in the entire 10 octaves, when added together, total the same in the amount of energy expended. Motion in inertia is characterized by an absolute lack of what man calls valence, which is grabbing power or uniting power. All of the elements of matter in motion in opposition have this uniting power in varying degrees or periodicity, just as they have periodicity in electromagnetic charge and other variations. Hence, a further reason for disassociating the inert gases or master tones from the elements. Opposing impulses of thinking are generated out of inertia and radiated back into equalization in inertia. These impulses are alternating between generation and radiation in a periodicity of preponderance, which periodicity is measurable by man in many ways. All matter is apparently evolving and devolving into the illusion of many substances of many dimensions. So-called solids of matter are variations of apparent states of motion, registering in form the ideal of thinking mind, and sustained in their appearance as solids of matter by electric preponderance over magnetism. The electric nature of matter, in its progressive periodicity and variation of electromagnetic charge, rotation of its light units and other periodicities, will be written down with more exactness when the process of thinking is more explicitly written down and charted. Suffice it here to say that thinking is the electro-generative action and magneto-radiative reaction of mind. Thinking is a simple process of very complex effects, the sequence of which will be written in its proper place. The electromagnetic opposition of mind, as expressed in the process of thinking, is the source of all the energy of the universe. Thinking, then, is a process of generation of motion in variable opposition out of a state of maximum motion in non-variable inertia, and of radiation back again into that state. The inertial line is that hypothetical line of absolute non-opposition between the oscillations of the two opposing forces of motion. At the inertial line, the two opposing forces are neutralized and in equilibrium. At the inertial line, there is no force back of motion, but there is the impetus of the magnetic radiative pulsation, which continues motion across the inertial line without force. Once across the line, motion is continued by the electrogenerative pulsation until magnetic conquest causes it to rebound. That state of motion which continues motion without force back of it will be known as inertial energy. The inertial line or plane might be characterized as the axis along which wave expressions of the universal constant of energy are born. The mechanic might characterize it as the dead center between force and force where no force exists. This point can only be passed by the impetus given to an object in motion prior to its arrival at that point. Motion is continuous as thinking is continuous. The universe breathes, inhaling and exhaling, as man breathes, and as every light unit, atom, and molecule breathes, and as everything in the firmament above and the waters below breathes. Exhalation and inhalation in sequence is a characteristic of all phenomena of matter. Motion is caused by the sequence of opposing impulses of thinking. All direction of motion and effects of motion are governed by these equally balanced gravitative and repulsive, and equally balanced decelerative and accelerative forces. The opposition of the two apparently opposing forces, which cause apparently opposite impulses, forms spiral waves along which the ideal produced in thinking is registered. The registered ideal of thinking is expressed gravitatively in what man calls the elements of matter, and repulsively in what man calls the magnetic flow, or magnetic lines of force, in heretofore unknown magnetic orbits. All elements of matter are radiative or radioactive, just as all matter is generative or general active. Electrically generating elements and magnetically radiating lines of force are the same force exerted in apparently opposite directions. The former is centrifugal, and its direction is toward the nuclear center in a closing spiral. The latter is centrifugal, and its direction is away from the center toward the opening spiral. Their difference is but a rising or lowering of potential. One always becomes the other. Each is the cause of the other. Radioactivity is a lowering of potential into higher octaves of elements of greater speed, but lesser power. General activity is the increasing of potential into lower octaves of greater power and lesser speed. General activity builds the elements. Radioactivity tears them apart. The elements are composed of apparently separate particles in motion, which shall henceforth be called light units or corpuscles. The spiral general radiative waves are the medium of reproduction of ideal throughout the entirety of the universe. All idea of mind produced by thinking is reproduced throughout the entirety of the universe of mind in measurable waves of electromagnetic opposition. These apparently opposing general radiative waves constitute the creating and decreating universe of integrating and disintegrating elements of potential energy, which man calls the created physical universe. Man has measured the speed at which the energy of light appears to travel along waves as 186,400 miles per second. This measure is the highest measure of the perceptible impulses of universal thinking. This is the measure of energy reproduction, which man calls the speed of light. Man's concept of the speed of light as being uniform is a wrong concept. To man, light is incandescent luminosity. To man, that which is not glowingly incandescent is not light. All matter is light. This universe is one of light. Solids of matter, heavy, dark, and cold, are as much light as flaming Arcticus. Luminosity is but a state of intensely unequalized and opposing motion, sustained in its state of unequalized motion by the generation of high pressures. It is but one state of the substance of mind in motion, a state which is within a limited range of electromagnetic charge, temperature, and opposition, a range which varies in intensity in each octave, but which runs the whole gamut of its limitations in the 10-octave cycle. Incandescent luminosity is but the state of maximum opposition of the two apparently opposing forces, and a state in which radiative resistance to generation is at its maximum, a state in which contraction by maximum general active accumulation of time into power is resisting expansion by radiative dissipation of power into time, of which much will be written in its proper place. Incandescent luminosity is that state of motion which will be known as the high potential of a system or an octave. It is the meeting place of centrifugal and centrifugal forces, or of preponderantly male and preponderantly female, of maximum maximum electromagnetic opposition, and it is the state of maximum registration of heat. It is the turning point where the power of electricity to generate mind substance into the appearance of form yields to the power of magnetism to radiate it back into the disappearance of form. Man's speed of light is the speed at which that state of motion in opposition, known as incandescent luminosity, appears to travel through those high octaves of integrating matter which man calls empty space, or the ether of space. This measure of light is but the high measure of a great range of apparent speeds. All of the elements of matter in all states of motion are but orderly and periodic variations of the one substance, light. As there are innumerable states of motion of the substance of light, so also are there innumerable so-called speeds of light. All of the elements of matter are spread out progressively in varying states of simultaneously decelerative and accelerative motion in opposition on the 10-octave waves, like successive tones of music. All motion in opposition is simultaneous in its opposition. The state of luminosity belongs to all of the elements and varies with the state of integration of each element. It is periodic and orderly in its variation, as the elements are periodic and variable in their integrated weight or mass. Matter which is apparently non-luminous is simply matter which has become sufficiently retarded generatively and sufficiently expanded radiatively to bring it below the range of motion in opposition, which produces the appearance of luminosity. All solids of matter are but integrated light, the generative units of which are sufficiently retarded in their motion, and their resistance to integration sufficiently extended in magnetic orbits to bring them below the range of the state of apparent luminosity. It has elsewhere been written that matter is the registration of the divine ideal of thinking mind. Man is familiar with the thinking process in his own daily experience. Consider for a moment the concentrated thinking of man in conceiving ideal. Is not the ideal at first nebulous? And as man concentrates electrically in his thinking, is not the ideal more and more distinct in form? And does not that form remain clear and distinct so long as man concentrates dynamically upon thinking that ideal? When man's concentration relaxes, does not the ideal become more and more nebulous in form and more indistinct until it is but a memory? Just so with the thinking of the one universal mind. The concentration of all mind is electropositively registered in motion, and its intensity and relaxation of intensity are chemically noted in states of motion of the very mind substance which performs the action and reaction of the thinking process. The intense concentrated expression of ideal in generated thinking is chemically registered in definite, distinct, rigid form, while the relaxed, less intense, expanding expression of ideal in electronegative, radiative thinking is chemically registered in indefinite, indistinct, nebulous form. If the universal mind is without form within itself, if its light units and mass are but appearances of form due to motion and not to substance, so also is mind in its entirety without form or shape or size. The universe of mind is neither bounded nor boundless, or it has no extension or continuation. Apparent separability is a necessary quality in creating the illusion of a universe of extension or continuation. The one substance of divine mind is non-separable, non-extendable, and non-continuous. The apparent parts of mind have an apparent relationship to one another. As the appearance of separability of the mind substance is but an effect of motion, then also is the appearance of relationship of one apparent part to another but an illusion due to motion. Relationship of matter is but an appearance and has no existence, and that which man calls relativity is but an illusion, just as that which man calls perspective is but an illusion. Relativity is the science of an illusion in 4 dimensions, as perspective is in 3. Well, I'm at 26 minutes, and the next chapter is chapter 7, or is it 8? VII. Anyway, it will be called Concerning Appearances. Now, this is so deep. I mean, I'm not understanding a whole lot of it, but I kind of have some kind of idea. If I had liked science better in school, I might understand some of these words better. But actually, if science sticks to their illusion that they pretty much have to believe everything is only true if it appears to the senses, and the senses are deceived, well, they're on the wrong track, because they think everything has to be empirical evidence that appeals to the senses, the 5 senses. But they have to retrain the way they think about things that are unseen and that they can't do repeated experiments with. And they have to learn to think in this manner, which it might be easier for a scientist than it is for me. Although sometimes what people know or think they know holds them back because they can't change too much from their original way of thinking. So I'm a novice at this. Science was my most dreaded subject in school. I did not like it at all. But I'm kind of liking this, and I have to say I don't understand it fully. And if anyone wants to comment that has a better understanding of what I've just read, they're welcome to. And if they would like me to send the PDF file of this to them, just ask. I'll send it to you. Because I do realize that you really have to pore over this and look at sentences over and over again